Hey, it's Brett. I want to talk a bit about what goes into creating a great Git commit message and just a great commit in general. This is a little presentation I made just for this video. It's called What Changed and Why, the Value of Great Git Commits. There's a lot more to creating a great Git commit than typing git commit -m for the message and then a brief message about changing some stuff. This is pretty common, and it's usually the way that Git is introduced, right? When you make a bunch of changes, you add them to the stage, you create the commit, you maybe make some more commits of what you changed, and then you push it up and you have this history of what you created. And that's better than having no history of changes, right? It's a step in the right direction. But by spending just a few more minutes on intentionally crafting commits, we can really help future us. And future us is you or me in the future. It's also your teammates. It's also people that at your company that they hire and bring in the future that look through the code base and try to understand, try to reason about the code. Your code diff in a commit explains what changed, right? It shows the line-by-line diff of what the commit changed. But it's up to us to explain why the change was made. And that is the value in Git commit messages, why it was changed. It's about providing more context surrounding the change. So seeing a diff in your account class or your user class, maybe it's self-evident, and that's great. But a lot of times it's not self-evident. There are a lot of questions that you can help answer in your Git commits. Great commits help those reviewing your code understand those changes. So that's this immediate benefit of if you're working on a team and you make these series of changes and you go through a code review process in order for those commits to be merged into your main branch, by crafting better commits, those who are reviewing your changes, commit by commit, can better understand the changes, which makes it easier for them and they have less work that they need to do when they reviewed your code. So that's an immediate benefit. Great commits help those in the future trying to understand why a change was made. That's that helping future us, which is about creating this legacy and creating this story and history of your code base that has value. And then great commits help fix bugs quicker when using tools like git blame and git bisect. Because if I git blame a commit, or if I do git blame on a file and I see a commit that comes up and there's this really detailed explanation of why it does this weird thing and yeah, it's not ideal, but it's what we had to do at the time and that kind of thing, then you know who to talk to. You know that it was weird and they acknowledge it was weird or an edge case or difficult or whatever. Or it might even explain why who asked for that change to be made. And that's really useful. And then when using git bisect to determine when a bug was introduced, you can then go git blame, or the bisect will end up finding the commit that introduced the bug, hopefully. And then when you show that commit, maybe it'll link to your tool that has project management information. So it could go to Pivotal Tracker or Jira or Linear or whatever tool you use. And then from there, you'll better understand why the change was made and then what you need to do to remediate the issue. And that is immense value that otherwise wouldn't be there. So when you're creating a commit in Git, here are the things that I think about when doing so. The first thing is what motivated the change. So why did I make it? Did someone on support ask me to change it? Did I do it just because it seemed like a good idea? Did I do it to improve performance or fix a security issue, fix a bug? Did I do it simply because it's a feature that the client or my teammates or my project manager or whomever requested? So what motivated the change? Then I know anything that is noteworthy. That could be this weird implementation in this one class, or yeah, I did this weird, but I had to do this. I was in a big rush because everything was down and had to fix it, or whatever the thing is, right? Just put as much information as you can in there because you're going to forget why you made changes and how you're feeling in the moment when it's 6 months down the line and someone comes and asks you about it. So any information that you can put in there that is significant and not trivial, put it in there. That's what I mean by noteworthy. Oddities and exceptions and edge cases you came across, which that just happens, right? Maybe you initially built it with this one technique, but then turned out that didn't work and didn't meet the needs. So then you went into this other technique. Like, mention that, Or if you found this weird bug at an API that you're using, you can note that in your Git commit message, which is great. Link to any relevant conversations you had. This is really useful if you're having a Slack conversation about something and it pops up and a person requests this change, or maybe there's more context and information. Just link to it directly. You can summarize it, but then link out to it. Sort of like show your work, give proof, have receipts of the changes you're making. Take ownership of it, but also document it. You can link to your project management tool ticket. This is things, that's kind of what motivated the change in a lot of ways, but that's a usually consistent thing, is linking out to that. Usually I do it at the end of the commit message. And then links to any online resources and documentation that was instrumental in the commit. I love doing this because I think it can help the team learn, and it can help those reviewing your code learn. If they see in the commit message, oh yeah, here's the docs for this thing, here are the API documentations, here's the source code documentation, whatever it is, link out to it. It's like, it can only help. Ideally, when you're making these commits, each one should be atomic. And that gets into this idea I have about atomic commits, which means that it exists on its own. The tests pass for that commit, so that you made some changes, you commit it, the tests don't break, right? If those tests need, in order to pass, rely on another commit, I think those should then be the same commit if possible. There are times where that's not going to happen, but ideally each atomic commit should encapsulate a specific change and stand on its own. So sometimes maybe a feature will just have, or a bug fix will have just one commit. Maybe we'll have a series of commits because it's pretty large in scale and you need to do step 1, 2, and 3 to ultimately get to the completion of it. But each step should be like a logical encapsulation of what needs to happen to make a specific aspect of the change work. And those atomic commits, like if you can't write a good commit message about your commit, then about the changes in your code, then it's probably not an atomic commit, because it's probably too small then, or it might be too large. So this can be really difficult at times to create these encapsulated atomic commits, but it really helps. And how I think about it is you want to break down your commits into the smallest significant chunks. So the keyword there is significant. You don't want to just change some little things. You don't want to have 20 commits that change these really, really small things that don't stand on their own and have value. They need to make sense to someone looking at it, why those changes were bundled together. And if you're making a series of changes, you want to have those smaller bundles, right? Those smaller chunks of atomic commits. So then a person can review those commits in sequence, making it easier to review. So all this kind of ties together. Commits that are too large are really difficult to reason about. So if you add a new feature, like a really, really big new feature, like a paradigm shifting new feature, and it's just one commit and there are thousands of lines of code change, that's difficult because it doesn't really show how you arrived at introducing that feature, and you lose all the nuance, and it's very difficult for future you and other teammates to reason about those changes. Then if you make them too small, it creates a bunch of noise and it's trivial and not very useful, therefore obfuscating the big picture of why the change was made. So you want to find this happy medium for your commit size, and just think of it as you want the tests to pass, you want linting to pass, you want it to stand on its own and be able to be something that you could show someone, they could review it, and they wouldn't have to review the next commit to feel like that commit that they're currently reviewing is complete. So it's a brief aside on atomic commits. When creating commits, I think there are two really useful tools in Git that if you're using the Git command line, here are the commands. If you're using a GUI in Git, this will automatically be visible because that's how those visual tools work. But you might, by instinct, use git add -- all or git add a or git add period to add all of the code changes to your commit. But I would be I don't do that, and I would be cautious of doing so, because you might add a bunch of files into your commit, and that's how you end up with these huge globular large commits. If you do git add -p, the P stands for patch, it walks you through an interactive step-by-step review of the changes that you then add to your commit. This helps you do a couple of things. You can sometimes catch bugs and typos because you're reviewing your code again before you even commit it. You can craft better commits, and then when you go to write your commit message, you have a lot more fresh context of the changes that you're actually committing. So git add -p is great. You can add an alias GAP for this, so you just type gap and then it'll do it really quick. I really enjoy that. Git add -p is awesome. And then when you write your commit message, instead of using -m for the message, use git commit -v. That will open it in your editor, and the V stands for verbose. By git commit v verbose, you will see the diff in your code editor that you're writing your commit message in, so you can really easily see what's changing in your commit message, reference the code, reference different aspects of it in a way that I think is really, really helpful when writing a detailed commit message. So git add -p, git commit -v, really great. Highly recommend using them, and I'll give a demo of them at the end of the presentation. Here are some examples of some great commits. They're ones I've written, so, I don't know. I feel funny calling things I've written great or whatever, but these are ones that generally I'd say a large majority of my commits are written this way. Sometimes you change something or fix something and it's really trivial and small and I maybe don't write as much, but here are two examples. Add support for moving a tile to another project. This adds an API endpoint that allows a tile to be moved to another project. That's a little repetitious, but it can optionally be copied as part of the move. And then I link to the pivotal tracker story. I use Markdown because some things support Markdown in a nice way, like GitHub does when you open a pull request. And it just shows you that it's a link. So even if it doesn't render out to HTML or whatever, it's still a nice visual. So this explains why it was changed. It talks a little bit more about what was changed and the implementation details, and then it links to the pivotal tracker story. So then this, 4 years later, I can go and look at it and understand the change. And the pivotal tracker story will have even more information about maybe the requirements of it and how it's supposed to work. And this is on a project that's the API that has a companion project that's a UI that uses this API endpoint. So this had to be added. Here's another one a little bit longer. Don't include current project in tile move list. This makes an adjustment to the tile move component to not render the current project when listing out the projects to move the tile to. Tile and project are kind of abstract, but it's okay. There's no need to move a tile to the project it is already associated with. It also causes buggy behavior. So I'm fixing a bug here by adjusting the implementation. I made this change based on feedback from Peter after he tested the tile move functionality on staging. This is the key point of why I included this example, is that I had some work up on staging. A collaborator tested it out and noticed that there were some issues. So when I made this change and fixed these issues, I mentioned that it was because Peter tested on staging. That helps, I think, tell the story better of these commits. I also made some minor adjustments to the storyboard route so that the tile always gets reloaded from the API to show that it has canonical details, and I linked to pivotal tracker again. So these examples, they're quite verbose, but it only takes less than a minute to write all this out because it's a great way to encapsulate and put a bow on kind of what you've just finished up so that you can ship it out. And I think a huge point in all this is that it's about storytelling. That is what Git is, I think, most useful for, is telling a story. You want to tell a story of the changes you've made, why you've made them, how they add up into your project's history. And yeah, maybe you're creating dozens, hundreds, thousands of commits within months, years, decades. These really long projects have just tons of commits. And maybe they don't all get blamed, or they don't all get used in Git rebase or Git bisect, right? Maybe it just does its thing and it never gets seen again. But for those times when you do need the story and you do need more info, I find that the little extra time it takes to write these longer, more detailed commits, it unquestionably has a value, from the code review to future you to tools like git blame and git bisect. So that is how to craft great commit messages. I'll do a demo and just walk through what I talked about so that you can see it. So here we are in this sample project called Converti that I usually work in. Let's make a change to the code. I'll just change some stuff, and I'll add some comments just as a way to show the git add-p. Really trivial changes, not doing anything significant, but I'm just going to save it. If we do git status, we see that changes not staged for commit are in that file I just changed. If I do git diff, we'll see that there are 2 changes. We added that comment changes, and we added puts high. So now what I do is git add-p, and this starts the interface of interactively adding changes to the stage. And then you'll see this stage, this hunk with Y, N, Q, A, D, J, etc. You can do question mark, and it'll show you what those all mean. You're going to primarily work with Y and N. Yes, add it. No, don't add it. Q says don't add this hunk or any other remaining hunks. But primarily you're going to work with Y, so we'll do yes. And then if I do no, and then I do git status, you'll see that the file lib/convertirb is staged to be committed, and is also not staged to be committed. So it's only partially added. You can see git diff puts high hasn't been added because we put no. If we do git diff cached, you'll see that changes was added. Let's add them all, just because we want to in this example. We'll do yes. And then we do git status again. We'll see it's been modified. All the changes have been staged. That's great. Now we do the git commit-v, v is for verbose. This opens up in Vim because that's set as my default editor in Git. And you'll see, please enter the commit message for your changes. Line starting with the # will be ignored, and an empty message aborts the commit, which means it won't save it. So if we quit now, it aborted it due to it being empty, which means it's not in the git log. Let's go back to that. And you can see with the v, we have a detailed diff of what is included in this commit. If you have multiple files, it'll list out those changes in all the files. I find it really, really helpful. Then I view the first line as a subject, almost like an email subject. For this example commit, let's go and we'll just add something like, we'll call this something like output more useful info when converting. That's not really what it does, but let's just say it. I write it in the present active tense, so because that matches git's tense. So it's not outputs, it's not outputted, it's not changed, it's not changes, it's change, because it matches git's tense. And that's just a habit that I've had. But I see people write it in the present tense that has S's on the end. Sorry, I forget what the difference of those tenses are. And I see people do it in the past tense. To me, I don't think that really matters. I think what matters is that it's clear and that the writing is clear. But I just write it in this tense because that's what I'm used to. And then here, I'll talk more about the changes. This won't match exactly what's changed here because it's so trivial, but I'll put like, when making conversions, I got feedback from people using the library that it wasn't clear what was changing. This makes it so that whenever the code converts, it outputs to standard out a friendly message. And then maybe I would like, link to the GitHub discussion. Whatever that link is. Then if you write it and quit it, or save it and close it, whatever you use in your editor, that'll close it, and then you'll see that it created the commit. So if we do git log, you'll see the subject, and then you'll see the details of that body, which is awesome. There we go. You'll see some past commits I've created. Even though this is just a project for me, I'll link to the docs on GitHub Actions. I'll talk about why I removed a file from the repo. And yeah, this is just for me. It's also for people who maybe would use this in the future, but taking that little bit of extra time helps tremendously, and I think has a lot of value. You can also do git log one line to show you a much briefer version with just the subject of all the commits. So don't worry about the verbosity being present at all times, because you can, there are ways to filter that out and just get that, that example. So just to review, git add-p, adding it by chunks. You can also just add certain files if you know you want all those changes to be in that add. You can do git add dash period or git add dash dash all. Dash a is the same. I generally don't though, but I always do commit dash v, git commit dash v for verbose, and write those detailed commit messages. I hope that helps you write better commit messages to explain why a change was made, not just what was changed. It's a great way to help future you and help your teammates out. It's a highly used, highly tread path when using Git. You write a lot of commit messages, and by giving just a little extra time, effort, and care, it can make a world of difference to you, your team, and anyone else who has access to that source code. Thanks so much, and I hope you take care.